Good morning, everybody. One of the subscribers requested a layout tour. So sort of got it in my 5-part switching series, but not all together at once. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. So my layout is based on Chillicothe, Ohio in the maybe late 1970s, around 1980. It's chassis system, the XB&O. This was still a main line at the time, the higher division. About 1986 or so, CSX decided to abandon this as a main line. So the yard was ripped up. The buildings that are on my layout are all still pretty much there, but only one of them receives infrequent rail service. But we'll talk about that as we get through. So my original layout was built as 16 inches wide, 72 inches long, which is about the fascia where you see across the top. That's where it ended. I decided to go ahead and extend 13 inches on the end to sort of act as a little bit of a staging yard, somewhere where trains would sort of go. But there's really only enough room there for a few cars and an engine. I didn't curve the tracks around the other way because my wife really didn't want the tracks running in front of this window. And I've got a door on the other end and the light switch. Plus, the yard is actually on the west end of the layout in real life. So let's talk about it going starting on the west end, and we'll end up on the east. So again, this is the extension that I built. The B&O had their shops there until 1965. In the 70s they were closed, but they still had a lot of cars there. They called it the Boneyard because the cars were waiting to be scrapped, and also right across the street, 7th Street, was a cemetery. So it was real common for railroads to say the Boneyard track is close to a cemetery. You see the tracks just end against the backdrop. Those are just things that I printed out, pasted against there to make it look like there was something there. This building is just a cardboard cutout I printed off the internet. To sort of be a view block. Eventually I need to make that look a lot more decrepit. It's really the area is sort of run down in that area of Chillicothe. So the overpass sort of represents Main Street. In reality, the yard was on the east of the overpass, not west, but I needed a view block, and that's a Rick's product, so I really like it. Okay, so let's start with the industries. First, we had General Chemicals. They made products for the paper company here in town, and they received chemicals in tank cars and in covered hoppers. General Chemicals had their own covered hopper fleet, and then they shipped out products in trucks, which were trucked across town to the paper company. These are sludge pits. Some of the byproducts from their process were pumped into tank trucks and spread on strip mines in southern Ohio to help reclaim the soil. Across the tracks, exactly where it is in real life too, is ITT Grinnell. It was a plumbing distribution company, had doors on each end. Probably they didn't receive much rail service after the 60s, but I thought it was a really cool building and I wanted to represent it. It holds 2 50-foot boxcars. The roof can be removed. The door can be opened, and so I do switch in and out of there from this end. Back down there. That's a pretty accurate representation of the building, which is still there today. Moving on farther east, we have Miller Distribution. I had to greatly downsize this building, sort of make it wedge shape. It's a beer distributor. Besides that, the appearance of the building is really pretty much how it was back then. They received a lot of boxcars of beer and plug door boxcars, insulated boxcars. Received actually quite frequent service. In reality, they were not on the same spur. Miller would have been on the opposite side of Douglas Avenue, but for space, I had to condense them, put them on the same spur. I have a team track, which I put in just to give me a little bit more something to switch. Don't know where the team track was really in Chillicothe, so I thought this was a good place to put it. This part right here is actually Washington Avenue. General Chemical emptied out onto Washington Avenue, and this is Douglas Avenue. So Washington runs into Douglas. These houses are just typical. They represent typical houses in that east end of Chillicothe. They're just Craftsman kits, they're not actually following a real prototype at all. This is Douglas Avenue. It runs into Eastern Avenue, which in real life would be about another half mile down the road rather than right there. Eastern Avenue is also US 50 through Chillicothe, so I made that the US 50 Mini Mart. There is a building almost exactly like this in this spot. Now it's a motorcycle dealer, but it looks like it maybe used to be a little store, so I made it a Mini Mart. And Eastern Avenue just sort of curves and goes into the backdrop at both ends there. These two buildings here, there, and there, they're just nondescript buildings. Like this might be a garage, a trucking company or something, and over here this is like a rundown farm building that's been abandoned. Weeds have overgrown it. The tree has sort of fallen over on the roof. The building that curves behind, the spur that curves behind Miller Distribution was originally my N&W interchange. Having trouble with JMRI getting the interchange to work, in reality it doesn't bother me that much because I've got enough industries to switch, and the real interchange was at the yard anyhow, not in this location. So I may just sort of make that into an abandoned track, so stay tuned. That might be a good scenic sort of detail to model, make that an abandoned track. So going east of Douglas Avenue, I have my yard office. Now back in the 70s this building was there, but it was more like the headquarters for the track gangs and the signal maintainer. Now it's where they actually park the engine at night, since the depot is gone and all the yard is gone. So you'll find usually a slug set sitting here with a string of box cars, tank cars that are destined for Mead, well, what used to be Mead, now it's Pixel Paper Company, and a caboose that's been here in Chillicothe for over 30 years as a shelving platform. So if you go to Chillicothe, you'll recognize this building, even though I didn't copy it. This is a commercial kit that I just painted, and the colors, and I think it does a pretty good stand-in for it. So I'm pretty happy. I'm not really going to change that any. This is Mary Lou Patton Park, still there, has a bunch of ball fields there, Little League ball fields. At one time, B&O donated a wood-sided caboose, and they moved it into place, set it up on a piece of track, and it was a concession stand for one of the ball fields. Used it for several years, started getting run down, had to put a chain link fence around it to keep the kids from busting windows and things, and they finally decided they were going to scrap it. Well, the city of Chillicothe got a hold of it and moved it down on Water Street and repainted it, refurbished it, and now it's a railroad museum. Really nice. I'm really glad they saved it. But I'm modeling it as it was in the 70s. So I see I've got a deck there where people can come up, order their hot dogs and drinks, and then go back and watch the ball game. This is Union Spring. Now it's Barber Spring. This is the only one of the companies that is still in business that and actually still receives rail service. Tried to model this into the building fairly accurate, and also the other side, but this side here is just a plain piece of styrene. I had to make it, wedge shaped to fit my space. This is not really a loading dock. It's more like if you look at it now, it's just like a trash place. It's just piled up the ceiling. So I sort of made it junky, like they might be making sort of boxes to ship stuff out in. Come around to the other side. This is the side I tried to model fairly accurately. They had a covered unloading area with roll-up doors on both ends. They would get gondolas of steel, push them into here and unload them. They also had a couple boxcar spots there. So I imagine back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, they probably shipped out a lot more stuff by rail, but it's barely in business now. We have an excess of freight cars in the United States are stored everywhere. Every short line has hundreds of them stored. So they're still in business, still making springs for railroad cars, but they're barely in business. But now they don't use this. They get steel in bulkhead flats, and they unload it outside, and they keep it outside. So I've never actually seen a car being unloaded there, but I guess they still do infrequently get some. Right next to it, there is a cornfield. There's a big farm there. This is on the edge of Chillicothe, the eastern edge. And so this is the Blueford Shops corn. And I like it. It's pretty cool. across the tracks from Union Spring, and it's right where it was in real life, is Wherever Aluminum. It's a division of Alcoa. My dad worked there for 30 years. They made cookware, and so they were probably the biggest customer of what I modeled, and is probably the biggest customer in Chillicothe besides the paper company at that time. They've been closed for, gosh, over 20 years, I think. They received inbound and outbound in boxcars. I decided I wanted to pretend that they made injection molded handles for the cookware, so I added some injection, some plastic, silos, and I get covered hoppers full of plastic. So Union Spring, like I said, they get gondolas full of steel and occasional boxcar to ship out stuff. So this is Wherever Aluminum, and they're a fairly big customer. I have 2 boxcar spots and the covered hopper spot. So I think that pretty much covers all the industries. Gone through it kind of fast. Just so you know, so I have a runaround here. I have a crossover here, and then there's a crossover up here. So the track closest to me is only long enough for about an engine and 4 cars to run around. The other track, which would be south, the south track or the eastbound main, will hold about 6 cars and the engine, and then can run around the trains, which is about what I usually switch. The one thing about JMRI is it never gives me this huge switch list to switch every industry, which is probably a lot closer to prototypical than what I was doing, where I was switching every industry every day. In reality, some industries got a car once a week, and they might go longer than that. Wherever probably got switched every day. But since I've started using JMRI, my trains are usually about 5 or 6 cars long. I'll build them up, I'll pull them out of my, place, my container there. I'll build the train. I'll do my switching, and then when that goes back to the yard, I'll pull those cars off and I'll put them back down here. So that's how I do it. My next layout, I hope to have more staging where I don't have to do that, constantly handle the cars. But it's really not that big a deal. Only 5 or 6 cars. It doesn't take me a couple minutes. And so far, I haven't dropped or damaged any. The biggest problem is I have to make sure I stay away from my wires. So I usually do my staging. Let's see if I can get. Usually do my staging on the eastbound main, so it's farther away. Because if I put a car down and the trucks get tangled up in these wires, which I've done a couple times, man, it's a pain. I haven't busted the wire yet, but it's a pain to get it out. Have any questions? Let me know down in the comments section. I'll be happy to answer them. So everybody stay safe.